Chapter 5 Part 2 of Salammbô by Gustave Flaubert. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 5 Part 2 Tanith. A sound of footsteps drew near, a door opened, and a man appeared, a priest with lofty cap and staring eyes. Before he could make a gesture, Spendius had rushed upon him, and clasping him in his arms, had buried both his daggers in his sides. His head rang upon the pavement. Then they stood for a while, as motionless as the corpse, listening. Nothing could be heard but the murmuring of the wind through the half-opened door. The latter led into a narrow passage. Spendius advanced along it, Matho followed him, and they found themselves almost immediately in the third enclosure, between the lateral porticos, in which were the dwellings of the priests. Behind the cells there must be a shorter way out. They hastened along. Spendius squatted down at the edge of the fountain and washed his blood-stained hands. The women slept. The emerald vine shone. They resumed their advance. But something was running behind them under the trees, and Matho, who bore the veil, several times felt that it was being pulled very gently from below. It was a large cynocephalus, one of those which dwelt at liberty within the enclosure of the goddess. It clung to the mantle as though it had been conscious of the theft. They did not dare to strike it, however, fearing that it might redouble its cries. Suddenly its anger subsided, and it trotted close behind them, swinging its body with its long hanging arms. Then, at the barrier, it leaped at a bound into a palm tree. When they had left the last enclosure, they directed their steps towards Hamilcar's palace, Spendius understanding that it would be useless to try to dissuade Matho. They went by the street of the tanners, the square of Mutumbal, the green market, and the crossways of Sinassin. At the angle of a wall a man drew back frightened by the sparkling thing which pierced the darkness. "Hide the zaïmph," said Spendius. Other people passed them, but without perceiving them. At last they recognized the houses of Megara. The pharos, which was built behind them on the summit of the cliff, lit up the heavens with a great red brightness, and the shadow of the palace, with its rising terraces, projected a monstrous pyramid, as it were, upon the gardens. They entered through the hedge of jujube trees, beating down the branches with blows of the dagger. The traces of the feast of the mercenaries were everywhere still manifest. The parks were broken up, the trenches drained, the doors of the ergastulum opened. No one was to be seen about the kitchens or cellars. They wondered at the silence, which was occasionally broken by the hoarse breathing of the elephants moving in their shackles, and the crepitation of the pharos, in which a pile of aloes was burning. Matho, however, kept repeating, "But where is she? I wish to see her. Lead me." "It is a piece of insanity," Spendius kept saying. She will call, her slaves will run up, and in spite of your strength you will die." They reached thus the gallery staircase. Matho raised his head, and thought that he could perceive far above a vague brightness, radiant and soft. Spendius sought to restrain him, but he dashed up the steps. As he found himself again in places where he had already seen her, the interval of the days that had passed was obliterated from his memory. But now, had she been singing among the tables, she had disappeared, and he had since been continually ascending this staircase. The sky above his head was covered with fires, the sea filled the horizon, at each step he was surrounded by a still greater immensity, and he continued to climb upward with that strange facility which we experience in dreams. The rustling of the veil as it brushed against the stones recalled his new power to him, but in the excess of his hope he could no longer tell what he was to do. This uncertainty alarmed him. From time to time he would press his face against the quadrangular openings in the closed apartments, and he thought that in several of the latter he could see persons asleep. The last story, which was narrower, formed a sort of dado on the summit of the terraces. Matho walked around it slowly. A milky light filled the sheets of talc which closed the little apertures in the wall, and in their symmetrical arrangement they looked in the darkness like rows of delicate pearls. He recognized the red door with the black cross. The throbbing of his heart increased. He would fain have fled. He pushed the door and it opened. A gallery-shaped lamp hung burning in the back part of the room, and 3 rays, emitted from its silver keel, trembled on the lofty wainscots, which were painted red with black bands. The ceiling was an assemblage of small beams, with amethysts and topazes amid their gilding in the knots of the wood. On both the great sides of the apartment there stretched a very low bed made with white leathern straps, while above, semicircles like shells, opened in the thickness of the wall, suffered a garment to come out and hang down to the ground. There was an oval basin with a step of onyx around it. Delicate slippers of serpent skin were standing on the edge, together with an alabaster flagon. The trace of a wet footstep might be seen beyond. Exquisite scents were evaporating. Matho glided over the pavement, which was encrusted with gold, mother of pearl, and glass, and in spite of the polished smoothness of the ground, it seemed to him that his feet sank as though he were walking on sand. Behind the silver lamp he had perceived a large square of azure held in the air by 4 cords from above, and he advanced with loins bent and mouth open. Flamingo's wings, fitted on branches of black coral, lay about among purple cushions, tortoise-shell strigils, cedar boxes, and ivory spatulas. There were antelopes' horns with rings and bracelets strung upon them, and clay vases were cooling in the wind in the cleft of the wall, with a lattice-work of reeds. Several times he struck his foot, for the ground had various levels of unequal height, which formed a succession of apartments, as it were, in the room. In the background there were silver balustrades surrounding a carpet strewn with painted flowers. At last he came to the hanging bed beside an ebony stool serving to get into it. But the light ceased at the edge, and the shadow, like a great curtain, revealed only a corner of the red mattress, with the extremity of a little naked foot lying upon its ankle. Then Matho took up the lamp very gently. She was sleeping with her cheek in one hand and with the other arm extended. Her ringlets were spread about her in such abundance that she appeared to be lying on black feathers, and in her ample white tunic, wound in soft draperies to her feet following the curves of her person. Her eyes were just visible beneath her half-closed eyelids. The curtains, which stretched perpendicularly, enveloped her in a bluish atmosphere, and the motion of her breathing, communicating itself to the chords, seemed to rock her in the air. A long mosquito was buzzing. Matho stood motionless, holding the silver lamp at arm's length, but on a sudden the mosquito net caught fire and disappeared, and Salammbô awoke. The fire had gone out of itself. She did not speak. The lamp caused great luminous moires to flicker on the wainscots. "What is it?" she said. He replied, "'Tis the veil of the goddess." "The veil of the goddess!" cried Salammbô, and supporting herself on both clenched hands, she leaned shuddering out. He resumed: "I have been in the depth of the sanctuary to seek it for you. Look!" The zaïmph shone a mass of rays. "Do you remember it?" said Matho. "You appeared at night in my dreams, but I did not guess the mute command of your eyes." She put out one foot upon the ebony stool. "Had I understood I should have hastened hither, I should have forsaken the army, I should not have left Carthage. To obey you I would go down through the caverns of Hadrumetum into the kingdom of the shades. Forgive me, it was as though mountains were weighing upon my days, and yet something drew me on. I tried to come to you. Should I ever have dared this without the gods? Let us go, you must follow me. Or if you do not wish to do so, I will remain. What matters it to me? Drown my soul in your breath, let my lips be crushed with kissing your hands." "Let me see it," she said. "Nearer, nearer." Day was breaking, and the sheets of talc in the walls were filled with a vinous colour. Salammbô leaned fainting against the cushions of the bed. "I love you!" cried Matho. "Give it!" she stammered out, and they drew closer together. She kept advancing clothed in her white trailing simar, and with her large eyes fastened on the veil. Matho gazed at her, dazzled by the splendours of her head, and holding out the zaïmph towards her, was about to enfold her in an embrace. She was stretching out her arms. Suddenly she stopped, and they stood looking at each other, open-mouthed. Then, without understanding the meaning of his solicitation, a horror seized upon her. Her delicate eyebrows rose, her lips opened, she trembled. At last she struck one of the brass pateras which hung at the corners of the red mattress, crying: "To the rescue! To the rescue! Back, sacrilegious man, infamous and accursed! Help! Tanach, Craum, Eva, Micipsa, Scowl!" And the scared face of Spendius, appearing in the wall between the clay flagons, cried out these words: "Fly! They are hastening hither!" A great tumult came towards shaking the staircases, and a flood of people, women, serving men and slaves, rushed into the room with stakes, tomahawks, cutlasses, and daggers. They were nearly paralyzed with indignation on perceiving a man. The female servants uttered funeral wailings, and the eunuchs grew pale beneath their black skins. Matho was standing behind the balustrades. With the zaïmph which was wrapped about him, he looked like a sidereal god surrounded by the firmament. The slaves were going to fall upon him, but she stopped them. "Touch it not! It is the mantle of the goddess!" She had drawn back into a corner, but she took a step towards him, and stretched forth her naked arm. "A curse upon you, you who have plundered Tanith! Hatred, vengeance, massacre, and grief! May Gurzel, god of battles, rend you! May Mastiman, god of the dead, stifle you! And may the other, he who may not be named, burn you!" Matho uttered a cry as though he had received a sword thrust. She repeated several times: "Begone! Begone!" The crowd of servants spread out, and Matho, with hanging head, passed slowly through the midst of them, but at the door he stopped, for the fringe of the zaïmph had caught on one of the golden stars with which the flagstones were paved. He pulled it off abruptly with a movement of his shoulder, and went down the staircases. Spendius, bounding from terrace to terrace, and leaping over the hedges and trenches, had escaped from the gardens. He reached the foot of the pharos. The wall was discontinued at this spot, so inaccessible was the cliff. He advanced to the edge, lay down on his back, and let himself slide, feet foremost, down the whole length of it to the bottom. Then, by swimming, he reached the Cape of the Tombs, made a wide circuit of the salt lagoon, and re-entered the camp of the barbarians in the evening. The sun had risen, and like a retreating lion, Matho went down the pass, casting terrible glances about him. A vague clamour reached his ears. It had started from the palace, and it was beginning afresh in the distance, towards the Acropolis. Some said that the treasure of the Republic had been seized in the temple of Moloch, others spoke of the assassination of a priest. It was thought, moreover, that the barbarians had entered the city. Matho, who did not know how to get out of the enclosures, walked straight before him. He was seen, and an outcry was raised. Everyone understood, and there was consternation, then immense wrath. From the bottom of the Mappalian quarter, from the heights of the Acropolis, from the catacombs, from the borders of the lake, the multitude came in haste. The patricians left their palaces, and the traders left their shops. The women forsook their children. Swords, hatchets, and sticks were seized, but the obstacle which had stayed Salammbô stayed them. How could the veil be taken back? The mere sight of it was a crime, it was of the nature of the gods, and contact with it was death. The despairing priests wrung their hands on the peristyles of the temples. The guards of the legion galloped about at random. The people climbed upon the houses, the terraces, the shoulders of the colossuses, and the masts of the ships. He went on, nevertheless, and the rage, and the terror also, increased at each of his steps. The streets cleared at his approach, and the torrent of flying men streamed on both sides up to the tops of the walls. Everywhere he could perceive only eyes opened widely, as if to devour him, chattering teeth and outstretched fists, and Salammbô's imprecations resounded many times renewed. Suddenly a long arrow whizzed past, then another, and stones began to buzz about him, but the missiles, being badly aimed, for there was the dread of hitting the zaïmph, passed over his head. Moreover, he made a shield of the veil, holding it to the right, to the left, before him and behind him, and they could devise no expedient. He quickened his steps more and more, advancing through the open streets. They were barred with cords, chariots, and snares, and all his windings brought him back again. At last he entered the square of Khamon, where the Balearians had perished, and stopped, growing pale as one about to die. This time he was surely lost, and the multitude clapped their hands. He ran up to the great gate, which was closed. It was very high, made throughout of heart of oak, with iron nails and sheathed with brass. Matho flung himself against it. The people stamped their feet with joy when they saw the impotence of his fury. Then he took his sandal, spit upon it, and beat the immovable panels with it. The whole city howled. The veil was forgotten now, and they were about to crush him. Matho gazed with wide vacant eyes upon the crowd. His temples were throbbing with violence enough to stun him, and he felt a numbness as of intoxication creeping over him. Suddenly he caught sight of the long chain used in working the swinging of the gate. With a bound he grasped it, stiffening his arms and making a buttress of his feet, and at last the huge leaves partly opened. Then, when he was outside, he took the great zaïmph from his neck and raised it as high as possible above his head. The material, upborne by the sea breeze, shone in the sunlight with its colours, its gems, and the figures of its gods. Matho bore it thus across the whole plain as far as the soldiers' tents, and the people on the walls watched the fortune of Carthage depart. End of chapter 5.